It's funny to look at the past and realize that you had sort of a skewed upbringing when it comes to what America is. A lot of you guys know I spent about 3.5 years in Chicago, and then I went back to China for 2 years. And before that, I was in China. When I was in Chicago, it was 90s America. America was on top. America was the hyperpower. And growing up in a big city in Chicago, but also Midwest, Chicago is a city that's very different than a lot of big cities and very different from the rest of the Midwest on top of that. Chicago's a special place. It's always a special place in my heart. After going back to China and then coming back in the 2000s, I got to experience 2000s America. I had such a skewed 2000s upbringing too. So I'll explain to you guys what this is. We lived in low-income housing, but it was a very special type of low-income housing because this was Bethesda. For those of you who don't know about Bethesda, Bethesda, at least 10 years ago, had the relative percentage-wise, most number of Ivy League graduates out of any city. Really highly educated town. The people that took advantage of this low-income housing, a lot of tech immigrants, like my parents, for example, they were tech and science immigrants, so lots of STEM immigrants, diplomat kids. Basically, the people that lived in this low-income housing were kids of very educated people. Just not what you would associate. Like when you think of my childhood, you're like, he lived in low-income housing. You think of the friends I had in the complex, like so many international students, so many kids of diplomats, not what you would associate with the stereotype of who lives in a low-income housing complex. On top of this, right across the street from where I lived, it was a pretty rich neighborhood. And so we sometimes would play with those kids. I lived in low-income housing, but my friends, very diverse, all kinds of people, also had parents that were very highly educated and wanted us to follow education. And then when we weren't hanging out, we'd hang out with the rich kids from across the street. So it's just a very different type of upbringing. What I'm trying to get to you is that I grew up with a lot more integration and diversity than what America truly is. And that's something I think I had to learn the hard way. My high school was a little less diverse. It was very white. But my county, being a county that was very leaning leftwards, was always trying to explain to us that integration is the way. As in my school, my high school, it wasn't the natural. It wasn't the norm. Going to college, I thought, well, maybe I'm finally going to see more diversity. And college was a shock to me because craziest thing I remember, I had two groups of friends. One group of friends, it was me, this Indian kid. He was Indian American, so not truly Indian, but Indian American. And then this Albanian kid. He was very Albanian. Like he was an immigrant too. We were such a diverse group. Kid that was white, but not like standard white. And then a kid that was Indian. And then me. And we hung out a lot. And I remember all three of us had the same frustration. We're like, we thought coming to an Ivy League, we would meet more people like this. We would be in more social groups like this. But what we saw was exactly the opposite. And I remember all of us complained about this one time. There was I think he was a upperclassman who just was curious because he was a RA, resident assistant. If you guys know the college system, you have older students that live amongst the younger students to kind of guide them to make sure they're not doing anything too wrong, etc. And I remember the RA asked her, he's like, what do you guys think about college? Was there anything that didn't live up to your expectations? And all three of us were talking about this. It's like we thought every day we'd get to meet people that would challenge our beliefs, people that would look different than us. We'd be hanging out with so many different types of people. But it seemed like the tendency when you leave people to themselves is they just stick to people that are like them. And we were so disappointed because, again, going to an Ivy League school, this was supposed to be the top of the education system. And we saw the same type of tribalism. And so that frustrated me for many years. And I would always do my best to try to bounce between different crowds. So I didn't have too many Latino friends in college, and maybe that's why after college I hung out with so many Latinos, but I had black friends, I had white friends, I had Asian friends, etc. But I think I was a rarity. Like, you look at the majority of my classmates at an Ivy League school, and most of them didn't have many diverse friends. I thought there was something wrong with everyone. I thought I was doing it right. But then the more I got into society, the more I realized what I have, as in, I like integration. I like to hang out with many different types of people. It really is not the norm in America. And guys, this is not a judgment. It's not a prescription. It's not saying what we should do or shouldn't do. It all goes back to this, man. You know, I saw the 90s America, the town I was in the Chicago area. It was a very diverse town. So that's a skew, right? That's not how most of America is. Most of America, whether out of unfortunate historical circumstances or just out of people being tribal, it's very segregated. When I came back to America, 2000s America, I was in a town that just has a lot of very educated people. And then I lived in a special type of low-income housing that had very diverse faces of education backgrounds, of career backgrounds. And then right across the street, one of my best friends at the time, just a random white kid. So like, I had so much diversity all my life. And then I guess for me, it's just natural. But for the majority of people, even in America, which tries to pride itself on diversity, it's just not natural. It's not natural. And something I just have to understand, that I grew up in like a very unique bubble that the rest of America didn't have the luxury or the privilege to kind of really see. For me, every time there was too much homogeneity, it made me nervous. I'm like, there's something wrong. And I'm not saying that's always the case, but you want a diversity of opinions. You want a diversity of just everything, behaviors. Just one of the things that I always took for granted is something that helps move people, move society forward. But if that's not what's natural for society, even a society like here, then I really have to examine my paradigms. Knowing how much benefit I had from always being around such diverse opinions and people, how can I get more people to experience that? How can we as a society get more people to experience that? But then maybe I would have actually benefited more from less diversity. I just don't know, right? Because what I've grown up in, I take it for granted, but who knows what would have been actually even better. So I don't have an opinion on this. It's just something I'm understanding more and more. And so I encourage you guys now to weigh in on this. Did you guys grow up in such diverse environments, or was your community very homogenous? And the implications of that, do you think that benefited you? Do you think that impeded you? So that's something I want you guys to weigh in, because I'm not so sure about this. I don't know whether my upbringing, the unique circumstances, was it good? Was it bad? Was it neutral? Was it good/bad? So net positive, net negative, I don't know. Anyways, guys, talk to you guys soon.